We're going to. Wonderful. Okay.
Are we recording?
A huge thanks to all of our tech support people here. You are heroes, heroines. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We would not be here without you. Much appreciation. I want to say I'm really glad to see Iris Newman here. Hello, Iris Newman. Hello, hello, Iris. Glad you're here. Enid and David are here. I hope you are feeling better, Enid. We missed you at Kol Nidre, but we celebrated the tradition of you singing Kol Nidre nevertheless with the video of you.
Thank you very much.
Very
I am
glad
better.
to see everybody here. Now, since we set this class up, there was some shocking news yesterday. I'm sure people are reeling and very concerned about the news coming out of Israel-Palestine as of yesterday morning. Very shocking and upsetting. And so I wanted to make a space here just for a minute before we launch into our learning session. I'm just going to take 3 comments from people, and then we're going to learn and sing a prayer for peace. And we'll start that way. So I just wanted to make a space because of this situation here as we come together. So 3 people who would like to speak to what's on your heart in sort of Shemanu-like in relation to the news yesterday. I'm just going to call on a couple people whose hands go up. Enid, you can unmute.
All right, I've been warned not to get carried away, so I shall not.
You just have a minute. You have a minute, but we want to hear from you.
All of you know that we lived in Jerusalem during the Yom Kippur War. And this is worse. I've always been concerned ever since that experience, living in Israel, seeing what's been going on, that Israel really could hurt itself from within. And I think that's what's happening. They were not prepared. This whole thing with the judiciary question has split the country. And I don't want to go into more detail, but I just feel I've spoken with my cousin and friends in Israel, Jerusalem and Haifa. And it's a horrendous situation. Certainly the fact that Israelis have been captured. And it's too bad. We need wake-up calls everywhere, including in this country. So that's what I will say.
Thank you for that. Is there somebody else who would like to share? I know people have other things on their hearts. And so we'll, in the chat box, for those of you who are able to see it, there's a 4-sentence song. Some of you will remember this song from years ago. It's by Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach. And I'm just going to teach it. And I'm going to ask you to sing after me, but to stay on mute. Did anyone figure out how to mute everyone? It looks like that did happen.
Yeah,
okay.
I did mute people one by one because I.
Oh, you did. Okay. So it looks like a couple people still need to be muted. The singing will work best if I'm the only one unmuted, because you know how Zoom does it. So there's 4 sentences here, and I think we will really pray in a heartfelt way here. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Pray for the peace of Israel. Pray for the peace of all the world. All the world shall live in peace. And again, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Pray for the peace of Israel. Pray for the peace of all the world. All the world shall live in peace. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Pray for the peace of Israel. Pray for the peace of all the world. All the world shall live in peace. And again, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Pray for the peace of Israel. Pray for the peace of all the world. All the world shall live in peace. Last time. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Pray for the peace of Israel. Pray for the peace of all the world. All the world shall live in peace. Heartfelt prayer for peace from the heart of the city. We're also going to say our Torah study prayer now, just like candlelight and blessing, but it ends la asok b'divrei Torah. Please join me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank you to the source of all for the inspiration to be lifelong learners. Amen. And now we start our series on Noah. And so, as I always do, I want to ask who recently, once we launched this series, reread the story of Noah in the Torah. Oh, great. Wonderful. Wonderful. And I'm just going to ask a bunch of questions here. How many people first heard the story of Noah before you were 10 years old? Raise your hand. And I really should do a moment of visual access here. I saw about maybe 5 people raising hands for having reread the story of Noah. Now hold your hands up. And if you heard the story before you were age 10, I'm going to count these hands for people who can't see the screen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Wow, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. The vast majority of people heard the story before age 10. How many people played with little sets of Noah and the Ark at some point in your childhood or gave it as a gift to another younger family member? Okay. Very, very interesting. Okay, so this story is a pretty foundational story. Really in Western civilization, I would say, not just in Judaism. I want to situate the story of Noah before we go into discussing it. The story of Noah is one of the earliest Torah stories. If you think about it, we have Genesis, which is the story of creation, and then we have Noah. And so it's very, very early in the 5 books of Moses. Who knows when the Jewish people started? I'll tell you, I'll give you a little hint. Noah is not Jewish. There are no Jews yet in the world. The creation story, which is about Adam and Eve and every other living thing, is not about Jews in particular. There are no Jews yet. And the Noah story is not yet about Jews. When do we get the first Jews? I see Sharon. Sharon can unmute.
All right, Abraham. When
That is
he
right.
changed his name.
Abraham and Sarah, that's absolutely right. Well, guess what? Abraham and Sarah are the 10th generation of humanity. They're a little bit later on in the book of Genesis. We don't get the story of the Jewish people until the 10th generation of all human beings. That's interesting. It situates the Noah story. So what does that context tell you? Let's just have some brainstorming about, what's going on there? God creates all of humanity before the Jews even exist. What's the Noah story? What kind of values is it giving us if it's not even about Jews and we're the Jewish community studying the whole thing. Let's just have some reflections on that interesting story. Enid.
Well, I think it tells us a lot about good and evil, and that, I mean, even go to today's world. Let's look at nature and the fact that nature, we can't change certain things. But I think the thing we just came from the high holidays, that phrase where who shall live and who shall die, who shall live and who shall die by water, by fire, by you name it.
Mm-hmm.
That always talks to me. And I think that the Noah story is indicative of some of that, one. And two, that there are good people in this world. And there are good people who will take from what could be tragedy and do something and save humanity. And three, that all of humanity, animals, trees, whatever, that everything does matter.
Okay, Enid, that's beautiful. And I want to emphasize what Enid just said, that being a good person is universal. It's not just for the Jews, it's for humanity. It's like God sort of saying, okay, here's the situation for human beings, be good people for all of humanity. And in fact, in the Noah story, what comes out of that at the end of the story, we're kind of jumping ahead here, but is a covenant with all humankind. And those are called the Noahide laws. There's 7 of them, but it's the covenant. And does anybody remember what happens at the end of the Noah story? That's the symbol of that covenant. That's a universal symbol. What do we get there, Fran?
The rain.
The rainbow, the keshet. Yes. So the rainbow, whenever you see a rainbow, it's a symbol of the universal covenant that God has with all people. And from that come the Noahide laws that are about basic human things, like don't kill each other. And basically one about being kind to all living creatures, like don't rip the flesh out of a living creature to gobble it up, that kind of thing. Very basic, not Jewish rules, like make sure you have Shabbat and so it's, when you think about where this, how the whole Torah begins, it's like saying the Jewish story is situated within the human story. God is there for all humanity. God creates human beings in the form of Adam and Eve, and then God creates all life. And the Jews don't come along yet till the 10th generation. Do we have any more people who would like to comment on that context of the Noah story? We love to hear from each other, folks, so feel free to jump in. There's no right or wrong answer. It's Debbie. What do you think about this? Thanks.
So when I think about the Noah story, I think about harsh judgment from God. And I don't think, okay, there are good people. I think about how many evil people God judged as worthy of being gotten rid of. So I guess the harsh judgment for me is what comes to mind most of all, and not that there are good people. I mean, how few good people were there? Like 3, I forget exactly. Noah and his little family, that's all God determined was good. So that doesn't stand out for me as much as the opposite.
Thank you. And Teresa. You can unmute. Yeah, there you go.
I can understand about Debbie right now, but my thing was like, that's why it's a beautiful thing that whole thing is that nobody has to be Jewish. You just have to be a human being doing the right thing. Nobody has to be one religion. And it was explained to me when I first was examining Judaism, that's why Jews don't proselytize, because they think everybody who follows the Noahides,
Yeah.
does it. Why be Jewish when you can just skirt along without it? Because the Noahides are what's really going on. And it helped me not judge anybody, like just the Noahides, because I was raised real strict Catholic. So I love the Noahides in that it lets everybody be every religion they want and no judgment unless you're mean. Like, be kind. Okay, thank you.
That's great. I mean, that's right. It's like saying God creates all humans in God's image. So there must be many different ways of being human. And that Judaism is a particular gift. And there's a lot of midrash about that gift was offered to many different people and nobody else wanted it and the Jews took it. There's a lot of midrash about that. But if it's true, it's sort of like the universal and the particular. I feel so grateful to have this particular way of being human. But it doesn't mean there aren't other particular ways of being human. And in the history of Judaism, a lot of chauvinism about Judaism developed in the face of oppression. Jews were oppressed and were a minority community, and therefore sort of like, nah, we're better than you, we're the chosen people. It was the founder of reconstructing Judaism that challenged that sense of chosenness and said, you know what, really, actually, everybody's chosen in their own way. And we're not living in that same historic way of being under the thumb of a dominant culture that's literally annihilating us in different ways, or subjugating us in different ways, or exiling us in different ways. But that's not true anymore. Now I'll put a footnote to that. But Mordechai Kaplan, the founder of Reconstructing Judaism, was the one who edited out all the chosenness references. That's why when we say the Aliyah prayer, that confuses everybody, we change a sentence from saying, we were chosen from all other people. And in our community, instead, we use the Reconstructing Judaism language, which is we were brought close to God's work in this way. But many parts of the Jewish community just change one letter. And instead of saying we were chosen from all other people, say we were chosen with all other people by changing the Hebrew Bachar Banu mi kol ha'amim to Bachar Banu im kol ha'amim. So I prefer that change because I think it's easier for people rather than substituting a whole different sentence in Hebrew. But in our community, we follow the Reconstructing Jewish practice of substituting the whole sentence. Asher kervanu la'avodato, we are brought close to God's work. That's because this is all very relevant to the context of the Noah story. Dr. Mordechai Kaplan, Rabbi, removed all references to chosenness in Judaism. And we can understand why those references were there at a particular set of thousands of years, but the idea is we now understand that in different ways, everybody is chosen. Nobody isn't chosen by God. And so we changed some of the language. So that's the context for the Noah story. It's a universal story. It's about humanity. It's not just about Jews. And we don't get to the Jews until the 10th generation. When I was raising my 5 kids, we had a children's tape with songs by Rabbi Jeff Klepper. And one of them was, Abraham, the very first Jew, God wants to have a talk with you. He's promising you a land. Anyway, so the kids all learned Abraham is the very first Jew. But Abraham and then Sarah, of course, also in that generation, start the Jewish family tree. And so after that, we get the rest of the Jewish family tree, like Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, Zilpah, and on through the generations. So that's the context for the Noah story. And then what I want to ask is the 3 questions that were in the handout. I want to ask this time, when you kind of circle back to the Noah story, which in Jewish community we read every single fall. So you may have encountered it many, many times. I want to ask the question in just a moment. What are you noticing now? Because always when we have, in Judaism, we just cycle through the Torah again and again and again. So if you're 75, you've probably encountered it many, many times, the exact same story, but you're a different self each time you encounter that same text. And that is why there is endless learning, because we change, the text doesn't change. And before I open that up to what are you noticing now in the Noah story, I will say, I remember the very first time I led the Noah story in our congregation. It was one of my, probably week 2 of my 24-year tenure with Lev Ha'ir, Heart of the City. 9/11 had happened a couple weeks before. Then we went through High Holy Days at the Gershman Y, which was our home in Philadelphia at that time. And then we got to the Noah story, which was in our other space at that time. Was, I think that was 1616 Walnut, maybe. Anyway, we were somewhere that wasn't anywhere we've been in for years and years. And we did, or maybe we were in one of the community rooms. Evie, maybe you remember, because I know you were there, where we were my first Noah cycle. And we did a really cool thing that we should do again, which came from the prophet Joanna Macy. It's called the Council of All Beings. And it's just a really powerful experience where people prepare ahead of time. You get assigned a being, like an animal. You might be a bug, you might be a worm, you're some living thing. And you work with a partner and you prepare an introduction of who you are in God's creation. And it's just a very moving process because people identify with their creature, who might be someone very low on a food chain or like barely noticed at the bottom of the ocean. And it's all part of creation. And then we have a council of all beings. And we did that year for the Noah story. Does anybody remember that? I know Evie was there because I remember Evie being there. Does anybody remember? Evie remembers. Okay.
No.
Evie
I
does
do
not
not
remember.
remember. I don't remember it at that time. But what I'm thinking about is a year ago or so, I took a whole lot of people on a bus tour to see in Kentucky the recreation of Noah's Ark. And that's reinforcing what you're saying about it not being a Jewish thing at all. I might have been the only Jewish person in that bus tour. But
Yeah.
the most common comment was people were shocked at how huge it was.
The ark. Wow. Yeah.
And places for all the animals. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so we're gonna work through 3 questions here together as a group. The first question is, what are you noticing now when you return to the story of Noah? The second one is, are there any concerns you have about the story? And the third one is, what are the messages for today's world that come to us? The values, the teachings, the archetypes, anything like that for today's world. And we're going to do those kind of separately. So the first question is for anybody who is noticing now something as they return to the story of Noah that maybe you didn't notice before in some earlier year. Anybody? And I see Wendy.
One of the things I really appreciate about the story, it's not just about humanity. It's about any being that breathes. And that includes all the animals and the things that slither on the earth, like you said, low on the food chain. It doesn't include plants or I guess fish. But, the covenant is actually that God will not flood the world because of people and animals. And I hadn't noticed that before. I appreciate that.
Really interesting. That's a good point. I'm getting a message directly from Iris Newman that she can't hear. Iris, look at your keyboard And you may have a volume sign there over on the right that you can click your highest volume. And if that doesn't help you, that's beyond my capacity to problem solve. But you'll see a little microphone sort of speaker, and you can click the one on the far right that's the highest volume.
There is
Yeah.
also an option for closed captioning, which will display what people say at the bottom.
How do you find that, Patricia?
Next to your name, I think you can see, or in the options. When
On
you
your,
click
oh
on
yeah,
more,
on your
the
dock,
three
on,
dots,
on your dock, on your screen, it says
Yeah,
show.
you
It's
close
called
caption.
CC
Show
is.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Patricia. That's really helpful. If anybody wants to enable closed captioning, and will that show up for everybody if anybody enables it, or can the host enable it?
I enable it. I don't think that helps anyone else to see it, so I don't know.
That would be a good idea to have the closed captioning. Okay, Meryl, you can unmute. We want to hear from you.
Okay. For me, there were very few people. It was Noah's family, and that was it. What about all the humans that were on the face of the earth? What happened to them? Did they perish in the flood? That's my concern, that very few people lived. And are those the people that started the whole new generation, or were they people who perished in the flood?
I love that question, Meryl. We're going to come back to that exact
Yeah.
question. Who else noticed something new or different this time? Maria, you can unmute.
All the years of hearing the Noah story, it was always the dove that was sent out, and the dove finally came back with the olive branch. But this time reading the story, I found out it was the raven was the first bird that Noah sent out. And I thought, why a raven? And little, digging research, and raven was a symbol that God also used. I think he brought Elijah food. I think he helped Elijah later on. And so to me, it was like the first message was sent out to God, like, hey, the raven is the messenger to God, help. And then the raven came back. And then later on, the message was the dove was sent out for the first message was up towards God. The second was on the earthly level. Like, okay, what's happening out here? Is it safe? Is there somewhere that we can, is the water going down, and is it safe to settle down?
Yeah, thanks, Maria. I mean, I think the story gets simplified for little kids, which you're pointing out, because really the raven was the first bird to be sent out, but didn't find dry land. Then the dove gets sent out, doesn't find dry land. Then the dove gets sent out again. And when the dove brings back an olive branch, clearly the dove did find dry land. Otherwise, you wouldn't have seen the olive tree to pick the branch. So, and then the dove becomes the sign of peace. I read a midrash also that ravens were used to feed the priests in the temple. So who even knows? But it all gets interconnected in, the hundreds of years. So anything else that came up new and different for people? Sharon.
Yeah, I noticed the talk about unclean animals, which I had, and the fact that there were 7 of the pairs of the clean animals and only 1 of the unclean animals, which kind of suggests kashrut. Or I assume, I don't know what's the definition of a clean or an unclean animal. And also, I was going to say, I can remember as a child being very concerned about how all these animals got along when many of them were carnivorous. And I had an image of a chaotic image of the ark,
Mhm.
where, and there's no real explanation. I mean, I see here that it does say that he brought food, but what kind of food? And does that suggest that animals weren't carnivorous until after that stage, or it's confusing to me.
Wonderful. So I want to pick out and sort of extract a few things from what you're saying there. That's great. So for one thing, what Sharon is actually pointing out is that by the time the Torah gets written down, it's through the lens of rabbinic-ish Judaism, right? So already they have kashrut at that point, and they're looking back to this earlier story of creation and writing something down. So isn't that interesting? Because you're absolutely right. The clean and unclean hints to kashrut, which they didn't exist way back then. So there would have not been anything, there wouldn't have been such a thing as a clean or unclean animal. But it's being narrated through the lens of people who are practicing keeping kosher in some way, shape, or form. Beautiful. That's really true. And you will notice in this story, there actually is a call to be a vegetarian. Let me see if I can find the exact quote. Which is, there's a whole movement of Jewish vegetarianism, which is actually stopping eating all the meat. Okay, well, actually, anyway, I can't find this exact thing. You basically you're definitely not supposed to eat an animal that's still alive. That's one of the Noahide rules, but okay, anyway, I'm not going to be able to find the exact one here, but there's a whole movement for Jewish vegetarians, and the vegetarian movement in general is actually a really important thing for addressing climate crisis, because a lot of climate crisis is actually caused by the unsustainable practices of beef, sort of mass production of beef in a number of ways. Beef eat tons of grain. Well, the cattle that become the beef eat a lot of grain, and the grain is grown with fertilizers that are very carbon intensive. And not only that, but the grain could be used to feed people who are starving in different places of the world rather than mass producing meat. And also beef fart and create a ton of, they're not beef, they're cows, or they're boy cows, steers. They fart, which is methane. And when you add it all up all around the world, methane is huge. It's a huge, right. It's an emission that traps heat and overheats the planet, which destabilizes and it destabilizes weather, but causes extreme weather. It could cause more heat. It could cause more cold. We're supposed to have a very cold winter in Philadelphia. That's because of climate crisis in part. So I'm just saying that the idea of Jewish vegetarianism is actually a really politically and morally important idea. And I say that as somebody who isn't fully a vegetarian, but I think it's a very ethical practice, and it would be good for all of us to move towards more vegetarianism. So kudos to anybody here who already is practicing that very good moral value. And it grows directly out of some of this biblical stuff. Okay, let's have one more comment on new things you're noticing. Joanne, you can unmute.
Full speech.
1 minute, 1 minute.
About the
Come on.
Joanne, I think you're unmuted. I think you should be fine. Let's try you. Can you talk?
Miss Iris, how would you feel if I ran to Target real quick? I want to get some sauce. I'm gonna make shrimp Alfredo tonight and some noodles, okay?
Patricia, are you able to
That
mute?
would be lovely.
Okay, but could you do me one favor? Don't fall or not, and just stay right here. Because I'll feel so bad. I'm gonna be quick as hell, okay?
Yeah,
I'll be real
be
quick.
very-
I'm gonna take your keys though, so I can get back in.
good.
Is that fine? All right, I'll be fast.
Check the mail.
Okay, Patricia, are you able to mute there?
Yeah, done.
Now, Joanne, you're good and it's your turn. So just.
Okay, I
yeah.
just want to say that in my life, it's a little bit tangential, but not tangential. In the amusement park I used to go to as a kid, there was a great big Noah's Ark. And one of my most vivid memories, there wasn't any electricity in Noah's Ark. And when my father took me as a little girl, it was scary as hell because everything was dark.
Oh, wow.
And if you started thinking, gee, are there animals down there? There's lions, there's tigers, and it's dark and I can't see and I don't like this. Get me out of here.
Oh, my goodness.
So keep in mind, Noah's Ark did not have electricity. Right?
A number of people have kind of made allusions to this, but it's a classic B mitzvah assignment for the kids to design a Noah's Ark and figure out how to fit all the animals in, and like, how would you separate the predators from the prey and those kind of things. So, but we're going to be asking some really complex questions about that in just a minute. So any last comment on anything new you've noticed about the story coming back to it? Okay, so I'm going to move it. Oh, Enid, and you'll be our last one here.
Yeah, and it was interesting, the idea of taking two. I mean, I knew that just took two of each animal or whatever. And from there, the whole concept, which was very clever, that they thought about this, the whole concept of procreation and the continuance of that particular animal, that by having more, there was a value somewhere, whatever value there was of that animal, that it would continue. And it was part of the whole concept of the earth, of living and surviving on the earth.
I wonder if there was any kind of genetic selection concept when they said bring 7 of pairs of the clean animals and only 1 pair, so 2 animals of the unclean ones. Like they really, because if you think about it, people, by the time the Torah is being written down, they had been herders and they're now living agriculturally, so they probably still are breeding animals. So they did understand in that era about genetic selection. They didn't understand genetics, but they understood how you breed animals to be better and better without understanding the DNA piece of it. So anyway, that's interesting. Yeah, these are interesting observations. Now we're going to move into our next set of questions. Well, our next question, which is, and I'm going to circle back to what Meryl lifted up. Do you have any concerns about this story? And Meryl raised the question of concern for everybody who wasn't in Noah's family. Like, what happened to all those people? And I will say there is some very striking art from the Middle Ages, pictures of people literally imagining that question and showing, drowning hundreds of bodies and like skulls piled up underwater. Can you picture that? So I don't think Meryl's the first person to wonder, what about the rest of humanity there? Other people have concerns that you get from reading the story. Joanne.
Oh, the audio now unmuted. Result to show.
My concern.
I think you're good. I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
My concern was, I think Noah was to take all these creatures away because God got disgusted with the world that was created. That's scary.
That's scary. Okay. The idea that our behavior could have consequences that are actually scary and potentially devastating. That's a pretty potent teaching in this story and in some other Torah stories. Thank you, Joanne. Anybody else there? Concerns you have about the story? Sharon. You're on mute, I do
Yeah,
believe.
got it, right. It's hard to understand how infants and young children could have been evil. So, I mean, they were, well, obviously, there was a lot of death going on, and it was all by drowning, not a nice way to die. But it seems it's difficult to believe that everybody, including the youngest, were guilty of doing something. And then the other question is exactly what was it? Was it because they were fighting with each other and killing people? I assume that's what it was, but it doesn't really, there's nothing specific about that. So you don't know whether God is upset because people aren't respecting God directly or because of the way they treat each other.
Okay, so Sharon is raising a really important question. Is it possible that even little babies were so evil they had to be drowned? Is that possible? And we just came through the High Holy Days where I did that Torah teaching from Maimonides about how everybody's a mixture of good and bad, which today, if you study any kind of current contemporary schools of therapy, one of the big schools is internal family systems, and it's all about the inner parts, like a part of me is enraged, a part of me is generous, a part of me is sad, a part of me, we're all complicated. We are multitudes, right? Walt Whitman. We carry multitudes. We're not so simple. We're not all good or all bad. So, how could you decide like who's living and who's dying here? Because people have lots of complexity and we're all a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So Sharon's asking, what about the people who clearly really couldn't be guilty of anything, like newborn babies, and then extending that to, how would you classify good versus bad? That seems a little bit simple. Nobody's all good or all bad. Patty, you can unmute. Wait, Patty, you're still muted. Do you see your mute button, Patty, on your, okay, we'll come back to you in a minute. Fran.
Yeah, the translation I had talked at the very end about how the rainbow would be a reminder for God to remember that he had the covenant with the people. And I thought, oh, this sounds like it's this existentialism putting in motion the God covenant, but then God doesn't have any sort of memory of the fact that this is the covenant that's always there. He has to be reminded that he or she or whatever this God concept is, it's a reminder that there is a covenant. God will remember it somehow. It didn't seem right to me, but I didn't.
Interesting. Yeah. So
yeah. The other thing that concerned me though was that if it's the bloodshed, it said the human, if you shed blood from another person, then you will be returned. You have to be, your blood has to be shed as well. There was this retribution.
Interesting. Okay. Anybody else? Concerns you have? I think we lost, oh, Patty's coming back in maybe, but now I don't see her. Oh, Patty, are you back?
Yep, she's back.
Okay, you're on. We can hear you.
Okay, I was just went to get my big daddy's big Bible and was looking again and see that Noah was 600 years old, according to this. And
What do you make of that?
that's quite a task.
Wonder how his aging was going. Well, Patty, I think when we hear numbers like that, which we do in the Torah quite frequently, it tells us this is mythic. This is not about like a human person who lived historically necessarily. It's mythic. It's on the scale of big archetype, big moral message. You know what I mean? Like it's a teaching about. So the question we need to ask is not, is this true? How could someone have lived 600 years? We need to ask, what can this teach us? And those numbers are supposed to leap out at us, because probably when these were being written down, people lived 40 years. 40 years was a generation. So they're supposed to be thinking, wow, this number doesn't make sense. So where do I need to go with that? I need to ask, what can this teach us? It's clearly not like factual history. Like nobody lives to be 600, you know? So that's a good observation, that we're being pointed to pay attention to something here, but it's not how could a person live 600 years. Enid.
Yeah, following up on that, I'd like to hear more in terms of when this was being written down. What was the world, the Jewish world? Where were we at that point to maybe put this into some kind of perspective?
That's a good historical question. Well, the Bible was written over a period of time following the first destruction of the temple, that exile, and then the return. So if you think about it, the first exile, which happened in 586 BCE, that's the one where we were sent to Babylonia, and we cried by the river of Babylon. And then 50 years later, we came back to the land of Israel. And when we came back, it was a very kind of preservationist time. It was like, oh my God, we almost lost this whole precious tradition. We need to write it down. And so under the leadership of Ezra and various scribes that he supervised, at that time, so 586 plus 50 years, you're moving closer to the birth of Jesus and Jewish counting. As you can see, it's 586 BCE was the exile. 50 years later, if I can do my math, must have been about 536 when we came back to Jerusalem. That's when the Torah started being written down. But it's about events that take place way before that. Like if you think about it, a lot of it's about the Exodus from Egypt, which happened if there's any grain of actual history to it, it must have happened in like 1200 BCE, like hundreds of years before this thing is being written down. And these stories go even farther back, way, way, way farther back to the creation of all humanity and all the generations that would have led up to Moses, which could have been a historical landing point, somewhat historical, of the Exodus from Egypt. There's not proof of it, but it could have really been both historical and mythic, starting around then. But so do you see what I'm saying? It was written down in a sort of preservationist, desperate moment of like, we almost lost this whole thing. Let's get it on paper. And then, as you know, there were many strands of Torah stories that had all been passed down orally, and they were woven together by an editor. So sometimes we have duplicates of a story. We have two stories of creation, for instance. You know, sometimes, and in the 1900s, no, the 19th century, which was the 1800s, a school of historical Torah analysis or biblical analysis comes to be in Europe, saying we can actually identify the author of each of these strands that got redacted, edited into one body of literature. And there was this scientific method then of parsing out which exact historical era and writer put the Torah together, but all from Ezra's time on. And some of it was even more ancient oral tradition that they captured at that point, but it had been chanted or, you know, repeated in oral academies, so that people basically, the Torah was a memorized set of stories and teachings and codes and chants and just everything. And then it gets written, you know, it starts being put on parchment and it becomes Torah scrolls, and we go forward from that. So very, very interesting. It's like, what lens are we seeing that ancient past through? Was a very particular historical lens. Thank you for asking that. Teresa, over to you.
No, I was just saying, one of my first memories, like my first year of going to services, there was a midrash book for kids about Noah's wife. And Noah's wife had gathered all the plants. Noah's wife and the wives of all the sons gathered each and every plant, and they discussed the plants and they discussed the seeds. And since the trees couldn't go with them, they had to gather the seeds. Like, it was so fascinating to me how they, I thought, wow, these people don't miss a beat. And I just remember that. And I remember in third grade, the Catholic version, it was that God would never, ever, ever destroy the earth by water. So the next way, and the nun asked us, how is he going to destroy it next time? And all the kids were like, fire, fire. I don't know why, but and it kind of makes me think about today, how we're burning up the earth. I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, I think Teresa's actually raising an interesting thing, which is when you have a Torah story, it leaves a lot of room to read between the lines, to kind of develop it out. That's called midrash. Like, it doesn't tell the whole thing. What was Noah's wife? I don't think she's even named in the text, but the rabbinic tradition says her name was Naamah. That's Noah's wife. And what were the women doing? And it kind of gives you as long as you don't contradict what's in the written text, you can just spin out fantasy, which is midrash. It's Jewish stories about the Torah stories. And it's a wonderful exercise. Like, I invite anybody here to take the Noah story, read between the lines, or answer some unanswered question that you see in there. And like, what was happening to the rest of the people on earth? There's kind of something that doesn't get dealt with in the Noah story as the floods come, and write your own story about that. And that's midrash. And it's midrash never ends. There's contemporary midrash, there's ancient midrash, there's midrash from every century since the Torah was written down, and actually before, even oral tradition. So write your own midrash, bring it to us. That would be a fantastic. Teresa, I can see your hand in this. Like, go for some midrash. Yes. So Teresa mentioned one. What were the women doing? They were gathering the plants. That's a great midrash. And there might be a million midrashim coming out of this. So, okay. So anybody else have a concern about this Torah story of Noah? Okay, so we're going to move on to our third question here, which is, what can this story teach us today? And I'm going to offer up a couple big answers to that question that we've been hearing. I want to say that the Jewish tradition about the Noah story has been really self-adulatory, and like, we have a great gift to give the world in this story in terms of a vision and values, and that very recently that has been challenged. And in our next session, we're going to talk about a brilliant, brilliant writer. I have her book here. Rabbi Julia Watts Belser. And who she is she's a rabbi, she's a professor, and she's a disability feminist activist. And she's just a genius. She did the keynote at the Reconstructing Judaism convention last year. I heard her speak there, and I heard her do a teaching about Noah also that was brilliant. And I'm going to be channeling her. I can't find that exact teaching to share with you anywhere, like on a YouTube or something. So I don't even know if it got recorded, but I'm going to be sharing with you her work. And this book, Loving Our Own Bones, this particular book is about disability wisdom and the spiritual subversiveness of knowing ourselves whole. And I highly recommend it. She's amazing. She's a professor of Jewish studies in the Department of Theology and Religion at Georgetown University and core faculty in Georgetown's Disability Studies program. And she's also a senior research fellow at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. She is an avid wheelchair hiker and a lover of wild places. So she's amazing. And we're going to be looking at Noah's Ark with some of her teachings. But so right now, we're going to look at the more positive spin on what we can take from the Noah story. And I will lift one up from Rabbi Arthur Waskow, who years ago offered the teaching that right now we have one ark, and it is the world. No planet B. All of humanity's on this one ark. And what are we going to do to sail through those turbulent seas? So that's a potential beautiful image, inspiring image that comes from the Noah story. What else, what other wisdom is there for today's world of huge inequality, climate crisis, war, all the isms that target different groups? What, anybody have other values that you'd get? Like when we ask the question, what can we learn from this? What can we learn from Noah's Ark? And is it actually a helpful paradigm for us to face today's issues? Debbie.
It brings to my mind the climate crisis and natural disasters. And I guess war could be included in that, especially as with what just happened. That if I look at this story completely metaphorically, which I tend to look at all biblical stories that way, that the flood is in fact happening to our world right now. You know, if the whole world is the ark, we're flooding it right now. I mean, the Antarctica is melting as we speak. And the actual, what family will survive? I don't know what to make of that, but it does bring to mind for me the things that humans have done to destroy.
Okay, Debbie, I'm going to really interrogate this idea because it's I think you're pointing in such an exciting direction there. The world is literally flooding today, right? Thousands of people are dying in Libya because of floods, in Pakistan because of floods. Flooding is a major, major concern right now.
We even had it in New York City.
And the oceans are rising because of, for many factors. So they say within 50 years, or maybe it's 100 years, the 20 major cities of the world, including New York City, will be basically underwater if there's not tremendous change made. So Debbie, is the story of Noah a useful story for us in this day and age when humans are actually flooding the earth?
Wow.
In the story, let's think about it, because in the story, the people who die are kind of the bad people. Is this story helpful to us? Did those people in Libya living in villages on the, in the valleys, were they bad people and they needed to be wiped out?
I don't think so. No. I don't think so.
Okay, so what is this story a paradigm that's going to be helpful to us in this day and age? Or is it a problematic story that we need to wrestle with?
Yeah, maybe somebody else has a thought. I certainly don't think the people that are suffering from the fires and the floods and everything else are
right. So we're problematizing the Torah story, which is a tried and true Jewish tradition. We question authority. We wrestle with our text. We are God wrestlers. So don't worry about challenging the text. That's the inner process of Jewish development. We're going to ask, is this story actually helpful to us? Again, Debbie raised a really good question. Like in a world that actually is flooding, what does this paradigmatic story have to teach us? And is it helpful? Teresa.
Okay, I don't know, but I see that God did have hope. Like he might be a little bit of what is a borderline personality, and that he chose to kill so many, but he had hope. And the hope wasn't in the king of the place. It didn't say Noah was the king. It didn't say Noah was the leader. Same thing with Abraham. Noah was just a regular guy that was a good guy. And maybe, and then, so maybe it's up to us, the regular people that are the good people. It's not going to be the leaders that are going to get us out of this. And it seems to be pretty clear. It's not going to be the, so somebody good has to, that's not generally a leader, is going to be hopefully among the people that take care of this. I don't know.
Okay, I'm going to amplify that, Teresa. That's so powerful. So that you're looking for where there is hope in the story. What a great sort of, you're seeking the hope in the story. And what Teresa lifts up is a very important part of this story, which is the line that says, Noah was a righteous man in his generation. Or you could read it, Noah was a righteous man in his generation. And the rabbis have questioned, well, that doesn't sound too good. He was only a righteous man in his own generation, but in some other generation, maybe he wouldn't have, been seen in the same way. So actually, you come down to Noah was a pretty ordinary person. Maybe the rest of the generation was especially troubled, but he wasn't anything too outstanding. He wouldn't have stood out in any other generation. But Noah was a righteous man in his generation. So Teresa, like much of the rabbinic tradition, is concluding from that, Noah was an ordinary guy. He wasn't like a hugely outstanding moral thing. And where Teresa has gone with that is any of us can be leaders for a solution. Whoever you are, wherever you are, you can do your part to stop the flooding and to live into the hope. And I love the pursuit of where is the hope in the story. I think that's a fantastic question to ask. And I'm interested if other people see hope in the story, because we're really asking the question, what's useful in this story for today? What can it teach us that's helpful for today? And we're really going to keep challenging this story next week or next time when we meet again. So I think we have time for like one or two more comments and some closing things here. So other people, is this a useful story for today, and how and in what way? Enid.
Okay, I think one thing that we all have to look at and realize is whether it's fire, whether it's water, whether it's war, that whatever happens in one part of the world impacts all of us in other parts of the world, that we are an entire global universe. Yeah. And I don't think many people can see beyond their own themselves or their own local community. Yeah. And we do have ways of doing that. One, of course, is to vote, which we're fortunate to be able to do in this country. Yeah. And even the recent wildfires in Canada, look how they infected all of us on the East Coast, particularly, and other places from the West as well. And I'm not quite sure how to do that, other than we speak out, and the people that we put in places of power, and that each person is important, that each person is a human being. Mm-hmm. And somewhere, maybe we start at the local level, just looking at each other and saying each person has value of some kind. But this whole concept of people seeing, it's not just what happens over in China or other places. It affects us.
All
And
interconnected.
what happens here with pollution and all affects them.
Right.
And
And so we
so-
come back to one ark, one earth, one planet, one
Right.
humanity, and interconnected network of all living things. So
Exactly.
I'm going to stop us there because we're going to close today, not only with our Torah song, which we Torah learning song, but also with a fun other song. Many of you probably know this song, so you can be on mute and I'll lead it. God said to Noah, we're going to build an arky. God said to Noah, we're going to build an arky. Lift, da, 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 children of the Lord. Does anybody remember this from summer camp? Okay, so God said to Noah, right? I have to remember the verses though. Let's see. The animals, they came on by twosies, animals, they came on by twosies. But then what comes next in this song? Twosies, da, 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 da. Children of the Lord. So rise and shine and give God your glory. Rise and shine and give God your glory. Rise and shine and give God your glory. Children of the Lord. I remember the animals, they came off by threesies, animals, they came off by threesies, they'd learned about the birds and beesies, children of the Lord. So rise and shine and give God your glory. Rise and shine, give God your glory. Rise and shine and give God your glory. Children of the Lord. I will look up all the verses between now and then. I just thought of that song as we were in this session, so I couldn't resist. But let's also do our Torah learning song together. For our teachers and our students and the students of our students, we ask for peace and loving kindness, and let us say amen. We ask for peace and loving kindness, and let us say amen. We ask for peace and loving kindness, and let us say amen. And I'd like to share one piece of news from the Power Action Fund, which our congregation belongs to Power. And this is a piece of news. You can do what you will with it, but voting by mail starts in Philadelphia very soon. Enid, maybe you know, is that this week? It's sometime imminently. Anyway, voting by mail starts, and of course, there's a big election on November 7th. And in the city, city council is basically up for grabs. And the Power Action Fund is endorsing Pastor Nick O'Rourke and Kendra Brooks from the Working Families Party, which means that if you are a voter in Philadelphia, you choose 3 Democrats for city council, any of the 3, because they've already been through the primary. And you choose for your other 2 of your 5 votes, Nick O'Rourke, Pastor Nick O'Rourke, and Kendra Brooks. And what that means is that the minority party that will be represented will be the Working Families Party on city councils. Philadelphia has a situation where a minority party is reserved 2 seats. So it's going to either be, obviously the Democrats are the majority party, the minority party is either going to be Republican or Working Families Party. Power Action Fund is endorsing the candidates from the Working Families Party, which is Nick O'Rourke and Kendra Brooks. Everybody will make their own decision, no pressure in any direction, but I wanted to share that information about Pastor Nick O'Rourke and Kendra Brooks from the Working Families Party. Folks, love to all. Let's keep sending our prayers out into the world and our loving kindness out into the world, and each one of you keep some of it for yourself. It's very good to be here together. See you next time.